This is the third episode of a series on infrastructures. This is a series of 4 interviews to people based or coming from Ireland, Finland, Denmark, and United States. My main focus is in understanding the possible role of design in infrastructures. I started this inquiry interviewing designers involved in the development of services for other projects or based on other infrastructures. I wanted to ask them, what can we design in relation to the work of infrastructures? I started podcasting in English because I wanted to bring in friends and colleagues I've learned so much from. I still find it a bit tricky to listen to myself in English, but I really believe in learning through listening. I think podcasts are a great but underused tool in design education and lifelong learning, so I keep at it. Every time I get the chance to interview a friend, it's a real joy. Today's guest is a close friend of mine. We've worked together for years in the Media Lab at IT University. She is Sanna Marttila, a designer and researcher working now in IT University of Copenhagen, in Denmark. We talk in this interview on cultural infrastructures, on her work on OpenGLAM and Open Knowledge, and overall how digital infrastructures can support participation in different contexts, cultural heritage, and also decision-making in the cities. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation for this wonderful podcast. I'm very delighted to be here. My name is Sanna Marttila, and I currently work as an associate professor for digital innovation at IT University of Copenhagen here in Denmark. I'm a researcher, an educator, and a service designer. And I guess in very broad terms, one could say that in my research, I'm interested in co-evolution of digital technologies and digital services and how these infrastructures affect the practices and the processes of organizations, people's everyday lives, and society as a whole.
And what did you study?
That's a good question. I always forget to say that. I have quite interdisciplinary background. I did my PhD in IT University in the School of Arts and Design and Architecture, and I was focusing in my PhD study on infrastructures for digital cultural heritage, and I was working with 3 different initiatives that were building infrastructures for cultural heritage.
But before the PhD, what did you study?
Yes, I did study humanities, so in the University of Oulu, northern part of Finland, because I'm originally from Finland, I was studying literature and arts and also media studies and so forth. And after graduating, I was working in a new media company, and then I thought that this is very nice working in this digital new media and so forth, but perhaps I need some more education on this. And then I applied to do my another master's. What was it called? Arts and Design back then? University
Yes.
Arts and Design, yeah, back in the day. So I have a master's in new media there also. And there we met actually with you in Media Lab.
Yes. So I have heard you presenting yourself many times. And one of the things that took my attention when you presented yourself now is that you did not say that you are an activist.
Yes, that is true, because perhaps that is not something that is currently taking a lot of my time, but in my heart, I'm always an activist for openness and open culture. And that was the driving force of my work for a decade, when I was working with NGOs such as Open Knowledge Foundation in Finland, and also with initiatives with Creative Commons licenses and so forth. So I was a researcher very much advocating a certain changes and transitions in society. And for me, it was important that I was openly saying that I'm an activist, because that was a really driving force in my practice. At the moment, I'm not directly linked to open knowledge anymore, but of course, it's still visible in my own practice when I'm a designer and a researcher. And I think it's very important to be open about it. And so other people know where you come from and where you stand and what is your premise of doing things. So thanks for asking.
You were working long with this topic of cultural infrastructures. What is a cultural infrastructure? Can you give me an example?
It depends on how you frame it. From kind of a practical point of view, when people think what is an infrastructure for culture, one thinks about platforms or resources that hold and make visible digitized culture and art objects. So this is something in very layman terms, thinking in terms of digital culture and the infrastructures. If you then look from the academic perspective, there's of course a lot more to discuss, and how these infrastructures actually are socio-technical infrastructures, having both the practices and the processes and the legacy of technology, legacy of institutional practices, and also this installed base of other related systems and so forth. It's actually a quite complex web of different issues, and it's an interesting research topic because it keeps on giving all the time.
And what were the infrastructures you were working with? Tell us one of the examples of your research and design work.
Yes, so when I was working with the cultural heritage and how it was digitized, I was working with two specific projects. One was a very old project called PHP Fusion that was building a technical IT infrastructure for sharing audiovisual media for communities to collaborate with and annotate and do other social enrichment to these different media items. And the idea was to precisely work with communities and co-design this platform. Another initiative was called EU Screen, and it was from another angle, working with institutions that were holding different audiovisual materials and preserving them and taking care of them, and how those materials could be put available online for others to use and benefit from, for example, for different groups in fields of education, research, and so forth. And the third one could say it was the alternative to these quite framed entities and project, was the initiation of the OpenGLAM network in Finland, because throughout my research I found out that these official framed projects are not a way how people actually get wide access to our culture and our history, that we need to have more bottom-up community and participatory practices to try out to actually understand what are the needs and wishes for this culture that we all own.
So let's go to this OpenGLAM or OpenGLAM. What does it stand for, OpenGLAM?
Yeah. Avoin means open in English, and then GLAM stands for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And it was, I believe that it was 2011 as approximately that it was initiated in Europe as an interest group with Open Knowledge Foundation that aimed to support open access to these cultural heritage materials that were currently digitized at the moment in Europe. And then later on, also OpenGLAM was initiated in Finland to help the organizations to think about the good practices and principles, how to open up these holdings that they had. And also at one hand, support the communities and building bridges between these different entities, because that was very much the case back then, that there organizations were working in silos, and some of these European initiatives like Europeana, that is the biggest infrastructure for digital cultural heritage and art at the moment. It was like trying to bridge these different institutions and bring the communities also to the platform.
So what was your role as designer in OpenGLAM?
In OpenGLAM, I believe that I could say that I was the co-initiator, and so planning the processes where we had, first of all, trying to understand what are the different challenges that the organizations face when opening up, and then learning about a lot of the issues that we need to tackle when designing these platforms. And also the second part was then when we realized that there's a lot of lack in knowledge and skills and practices. So we designed and planned this Open Culture Masterclass that was inviting organizations to come and learn in practice about open data, open culture, these practices, and also then open up a small collection of culture, digital culture, for public to use. And I think that was like a starting point for many organizations to understand how valuable this opening up is, and also the core understanding that it's not really a technical issue. It's not about like how to do it in technical terms, but also it's a change of mindset, a change of framework, a change of your own practice as a museum, as a library, as an archive, because it has been very controlled practice of conservation of the culture and history, but also like deciding what is culture, what is art, and it's only been reserved to those professionals who have been educated and who has the institutional label. So it was also this negotiation process, like, oh, what happens if we allow other people, non-professionals, to come and be interacting with this digital content.
One of the things that you have used, or one tool that, or a mechanism that you have used to involve communities, was to organize hackathons, right?
Yes, the third phase of this process was then when we had the content open, because in Finland at the time there was like only few items publicly available. So then we wanted to explore what could be done with this collection of open content. And then we initiated Hack for Heritage, Hack for Free. And so it was a hackathon series that invited both the organizations from cultural institutions and also then practitioners or students, citizens, residents, whoever was interested in exploring digital open cultural heritage. And it was such a rewarding and wonderful process to see how people got excited, did different artworks, did different projects on like installations, web pages, video poems, because I remember I organized as part of one of your hackathon a track on video poems. Yeah, precisely. And wasn't it fantastic to see the people that were interested in exploring visuals and then bringing them in dialogue with these poets? It was interesting. I thought it was very lovely. Thank you for reminding me.
It was a reminder also for me. So what difference does it make to a designer to think in terms of infrastructures?
I think this is a very valid question if one thinks in terms of infrastructure, because it's a bit the same thing if you think about how in design we have moved from product centricity to a more kind of a systemic view and a holistic view, thinking how things are interrelated and linked in. And one always brings, even it's a new practice, new technology, new organization, new initiative, to this system, then it changes other parts of the system. So one has to think in terms of systems. That's the one thing. And the second thing is that also understanding that infrastructures are always in flux. They are always in a process of becoming. So then there is no static infrastructure if one views them as a socio-technical entities. That's also another way. And also that there's a lot of not technological issues to be considered. For example, policies and also legal frameworks. Like, for example, I mentioned this Creative Commons licenses, so that it was important that in the infrastructural level, you make the decision to open the content with the Creative Commons license, because then it's acknowledged infrastructure, legal infrastructure itself, and so forth. So it is like opening up a lot of areas that sometimes designers think that no, it's not related to my profession because I'm the form giver, I'm doing the design of the participatory process and so forth. So it also opens up this design space for more professionals, I would say, and the collaboration with other professionals. So it's not really that far from the Scandinavian tradition of participatory design that I lean on myself in my practice. So I think I've used that approach a lot when working with infrastructures. And also there's a very core, in my opinion, that often when designing, I would say at least in public sector in the Nordic countries that I know a bit about, is that we start from a technology. There's a new technology or different kinds of infrastructures that we want to build. And we start with the technology. But we forget often the actual practices and the needs of the people. So when doing the work of participatory or collaborative infrastructure development, it is important to take those individuals, communities, groups, organizations to be a part of this development. And I think we try to do it, but often it is consulting or involvement in testing and so forth. But if we want to take this work seriously, I think we should involve people early on and actually make sure that they are part of this development process, because we can rehearse the practices together. So then it's also massaging and using it as a clay to make the infrastructure for those local communities and also like the nations and the residents and the cities and so forth. So that is my approach to as a designer to do the infrastructural development.
So one of your research questions is how information infrastructures can contribute to cultural commons. So what did you find out there?
So another framework that I used in my research that we have not talked about was the notion of commons and the way of organizing and maintaining and caring for common resources. So I bring this notion of commons in dialogue with the infrastructure and infrastructuring, and how I am proposing that if we would take this common approach to our digital culture heritage, what would it look like? And so I'm developing these different principles for doing this collective infrastructuring, so that could lead to commons. And if I can read here that I have written them down. So these 4 strategies were at the time. So I was suggesting that one of the principles would be that we are probing and building upon the installed base of an infrastructure. And an installed base is a quite known concept in information system studies and also infrastructure studies, meaning that we have to understand the legacy and what is the socio-technical practices and technologies that the infrastructure has. And the other one was that it is important to stimulate and simulate design, use, and through gateways and in between infrastructures. a lot of concepts again. So these in-between infrastructures could be prototypes or something how that bridges, and you can rehearse these different new practices, new technologies, and someone had an idea of an innovation. Let's try it out before actually bringing into the development phase.
Can you give me an example of this one? Because this in-between infrastructures and prototyping is something that at least I can understand.
So but one could say that these hackathons and workshops could be one. And also then these different kinds of applications could be one. So you tried out something that was not existing before, that is challenging, or sometimes viewing the offering of the infrastructure in a different way. I've done a lot of different experiments that were like from GIF animation workshops to hackathons to having a co-design workshop to develop a media application. So it could be multiple different things. But this gateway is a technical term that is connecting two parts that are not linked before. So that is I'm using as a metaphorical way how to connect these two entities. So it could be like how to connect an archive with the Wikimedia, for example. How is that done in practice? And how could you not only do it in a technical way, but how do you also could learn from each other's practices? So bringing this kind of a practice into play. And then the third one, I was thinking a lot how to frame it, because it is quite bold to suggest that one as a designer could create or contribute to a commons culture or the culture. But I am suggesting it because I think that the designer can at least provide some good practices, ways of collecting resources, making common pool resources, sharing knowledge and so forth. And for example, in OpenGLAM work that we did, that was in the core, that the peer knowledge sharing and learning from others was, I believe, much more important than the actual lectures and also this type of activities that we hosted. And because that supports people's individual work in the organizations that maybe are still lacking the courage or the maturity or something to actually move on with these issues.
This interview is part of the lists D&D in English, Infrastructures, Democracia y Diseño, y Gobierno y Diseño. The lists can be found in Spotify, in our website, and in YouTube. Sanna says that it is key to understand that infrastructures are always in the process of becoming. In relation to the future developments of environmental research infrastructures, I have noticed that in lots of proposals, they mentioned that they will co-create or co-design. If infrastructures are always evolving and need to connect with others to grow, using a co-design approach, it is a great way to do it in a non-hierarchical and participatory manner. In design, we focus on how we do things, and because these methods are familiar, it feels like welcoming space. Even though we know that many others are co-designing and co-creating alongside us, just calling it co-design makes it feel like an open invitation. Let's continue listening to Sanna, that she has a lot more to tell us. I remember when you talk about this, that we have done some workshops in the interior of Finland, that we have this idea, a road trip, right? We went to Pori and to different parts of Finland because the whole idea was to support this peer learning in small groups in different parts of Finland, not only in the metropolitan Helsinki area.
That's a good reminder again, because yes, we did go to multiple different places, and one could say that we did this road trip, yes, and the legwork in a way that the first part of the workshop was always that we were telling what is, in our opinion, open culture, what are the different principles, and what can be some reservations that some organizations have had, and what are the learnings. And then a lot of the workshop was then trying to map out different possibilities that these different organizations had locally. So building this local knowledge base and bringing the institutions together. And it was so rewarding to be in those workshops when you could hear that the participants were saying, no, I was doing the same thing, or I was thinking about the same issues, or and then they found someone who was interested in the same issues and had the same passion to open up their resources to a wider public of that town or that city. So it was very rewarding, and we can see now that the work that we did had bear some fruit, because in Finland, 10 years later, when we started OpenGLAM, there's a lot of open collections of digital heritage and culture and art, and it's used by different sectors of society. So
yes, and do you think that you can experiment in the development of these infrastructures? As part of these co-design processes, we were talking about prototyping, but there are also other type of experiments.
Absolutely. Doing experiments is a crucial part of infrastructural development. And I believe that when doing the prototypes, there's also what type of a prototype. It can be like very early on, and then it can be more advanced. But in many of the co-design workshops that we had, it was also trying to understand the practices that people have, and also development of practices. And I have said this multiple times that we often overlook this part of the infrastructural development.
And how all this relates to your research nowadays?
Nowadays, I'm actually working with initiatives that are slightly connected. For example, I'm studying how digital infrastructures can strengthen and support democratic participation through digital platforms. So that is very much connected. And another ongoing project is centering on how co-creation of socio-technical principles for the introduction and integration of novel technologies, such as generative AI, in organizations work. So in some ways, I'm continuing the work doing the infrastructural development or parts of it in the municipality of Copenhagen, for example, and also in organizations and different collectives. So in that sense, I am still in the same path.
Okay. And these digital infrastructures that support democratic participation are these type of platforms that allow to citizens to take part in different decision-making processes.
Precisely, these digital platforms are used to discuss and plan activities, to decision-making, and try to widen the participation, because it's a known fact that in many organizations, for example, associations or co-owned businesses, only some part of the members or the co-owners take part of these processes. And especially there is a lack of young people taking part of this collective decision-making and participation. So therefore, this initiative that we are currently building is trying to encourage and support vulnerable groups and young people to be more active and engage them on local direct democracy.
Interesting. And you are working with people coming from different groups? How is it? Who are you involving in that?
This is still, in this specific project, we are focusing on these member organizations, for example, these housing associations and so forth. So they are like organizations that want to use digital tools and platforms in their everyday activities. So opening up the space for more collective decision making and planning on issues that affect everyone's lives.
And these are not student housing. They are like this type of housing where you have all type of people living together.
Yes, precisely. Then, of course, we are also interested in how municipalities have used these tools. So one part of the initiative is to try to understand like how municipalities and cities can take advantage of these tools and how these tools should be developed in a way that it would encourage participation and activate those who currently are not taking part of these processes. For example, involving different groups of city planning or some other initiatives that the municipality would like to have some feedback on.
So, what is inspiring you? What are you reading, listening, or watching in relation to infrastructures?
Lately, I've been reading blog posts and work of Open Future Foundation, and that I would be one of my recommendations of alternative and very needed perspectives on infrastructural development in EU level. Another suggestion is, of course, this work from Helena Karasti, because her work and her collaborators' work on infrastructures, infrastructuring, and in context of different domains is the very seminal work in our fields, and everybody should read it.
Perfect. Super good. And in the future, where do you think your own practice is going?
Wow, I haven't thought about that for a long time, but I would like to be part of thinking more on these issues on open data again, and especially in relation to talks on AI and the ethics and all the policy work that is going on. And because it reminds me so much of the situation we had like 10 years ago when we were talking about openness, democracy, and when these big platforms came about. There is very many similarities. So I think I'm going to revisit those discussions, what we had 10 years ago, and try to connect them in those that we have now, because they are very similar. And it's a very surprising and frightening at the same time.
You know, I'm working with environmental research infrastructure with ICOS. So do you have any tip or any recommendations you would like to make for someone working on infrastructures, but other type of infrastructures?
This I have not thought about before, but on top of my head, I could just say that when working with environmental infrastructures, I think it's important to think about also this non-human or other than human actors and what role they could play and how they are part of these infrastructures that one develops. Because that is also this, we talked about this participation of groups and individuals and so forth, but what if we also think about these other than human entities and what are their roles in infrastructural development?
I had the privilege to support part of the great work that Sanna has done for Open Knowledge Finland, participating in some activities related to OpenGLAM. This conversation was a bit of a revival of these shared moments and at the same time a good excuse to learn more on infrastructures. I hope I have asked the right questions. As Sanna's work is familiar to me, sometimes I might not have realized if someone was not clear. Sorry about this if this is the case. Sanna brings up a question that we keep coming back to on this podcast. How do we design digital tools to encourage participation from the quietest voices? When I hear this question, it just reminds me that we are on the same page, always thinking about inclusion, about who we might be leaving out, what we might be overlooking or unintentionally discriminating against with our choices. So, when I asked her what she recommends for working in an environmental research infrastructure, she reminded me on the importance of designing with nature, going beyond co-designing with humans or organizations. For me, that means considering carbon because I work with ICOS, the Integrated Carbon Observation System. Recently, in episode 542, where we talked about an eco-social transition, the two designers I interviewed shared how they brought water into the design process by creating a chatbot that spoke as if it were the water. They could ask it questions and it could respond as though it were the water itself. It got me thinking maybe I could do something similar, but with carbon instead of water. Just tossing around ideas here and letting these interviews spark some inspiration. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This series is part of the work I do for an EU project, iRisk, Integrated Research Infrastructure Services for Climate Change Risks. In this project, we will develop services using a co-design framework. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Till next time, goodbye and design some more.